Hey, greetings everybody. It is GleeCon here again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. On our last episode, Galakrond died. The proto-dragons, did it. So stay a while and listen to this one. It's the final chapter of Dawn of the Aspects as we wrap things up with Chapter 5 of Part 5 of Dawn of the Aspects. It's called Past, Present, Future. Spoiler alert. And Jaina understood. She knew why the artifact had been created, and she knew why it was acting as it was. She also knew that it threatened to take Kalak from her. However, now the Archmage had the key to reaching him. Jaina only prayed that she still had time. They hovered there at first, unable to believe what they saw. It was Neltharion who finally did the unthinkable, testing whether Galakrond was dead by landing right on top of the heavy torso. Neltharion hit hard enough that the body trembled, but Galakrond did not stir. Malygos landed before the huge head, marveling at what they had wrought. In retrospect, he knew that he had not expected that they would live, much less triumph. The immensity of their victory only now registered with him, and the proto-dragon shook. It's also like a five-man party, like an instance. Alexstrasza and her sister joined him. Nosdormu circled the great corpse once, then descended. Neltharion abandoned his perch atop the torso to fly next to the brown proto-dragon as they headed toward the other three. Neltharion dropped next to Malygos.
"We have won! We are powerful!"
"We are lucky," Malygos murmured in turn. The charcoal gray male cocked his head, then nodded.
"Lucky too, yes."
But this was more than luck, just as Neltharion indicated, and increasingly disjointed Kalak decided, "We won because we fought as one." He no longer thought of himself as ever having been a separate entity born in a time long after this. Kalak knew that he had always been a hidden part of Malygos. He assumed the other proto-dragons had similar secondary personalities, but that point was not very important to him. What mattered was that he and Malygos, along with the others, had managed to bring down Galakrond. The world was safe.
"He was right. He insisted he was right,"
a feminine voice declared from behind them.
"We should have listened better,"
agreed a masculine one that sounded to Malygos and Kalak like none other than Tyr. As one, the proto-dragons whirled around, teeth and claws readied for the possibility of attack, but instead they confronted two cloaked and hooded forms with shadowed faces. One stood as tall and as broad as Tyr had when he and Kalak's host had first met. The other was slightly shorter and slimmer. Malygos judged the smaller to be the female, and was proved correct when the female figure spoke again. "Hail to you, victors. We and this world owe you a debt."
"Where is Tyr?"
Malygos asked impatiently.
"You took him?"
"We did take him," the male responded. "His injury would have proved fatal otherwise. He's well, but not recovered." The more the male talked, the more Malygos noted something familiar.
"Heard you in my head. You told us the way through the mountains."
"There were things you needed to know, such as Galakrond devouring both the undead and the living. We also sought to give you a few moments' necessary respite." But Malygos was still not satisfied. Aware now that Tyr's kind had been observing and acting surreptitiously, he needed to know one other thing.
Tyr fought. Tyr fought and almost died. You could have fought. You could have won."
"Power does not mean victory," the female answered solemnly. "We might have won. Or more likely, we would have made things worse." Tyr had a point there, too, when last he tried to urge us to a course of action. We were beyond caring, though, indifferent to everything once our suggestions to him were found to be without merit.
"We let our duty in this world slip away," her companion continued bluntly. "We were unfit to protect it, unlike you."
For the first time, he moved, raising a hand identical to Tyr's toward Malygos and the other four.
"Tyr was correct in many things, but most of all in this. He was right in what he found in the five of you. He asked of us, no, properly demanded of us to set matters right, so that no Galakrond, no other threat, may ever bring Azeroth to extinction."
The five proto-dragons glanced at one another, not understanding at all what the two-legged creatures meant. Kalak had some glimmer of the truth, but the haze that had gradually been enveloping him made those thoughts fade again. "Guardians are needed. guardians representing the 5 essential aspects that have helped mold this world and will continue to, the female started, but she too raised a hand toward Malagos and the rest. You will literally be those aspects, using them in whatever manner necessary.
Stronger, Malagos finally comprehended. You want to make us stronger?
More than just that. You will be something different, something grander. For the first time, the female hesitated, but only if you choose to take on the roles of protectors. Tyr was also adamant about that. You chose to fight for your world once. Will you now make it the purpose of your existence? The words were big ones, but Malagos found he understood better than he would have expected. There was much he grasped that even a season ago he would have believed impossible to decipher. And in understanding that, his decision was easy. I will do this. He looked to his companions. Alexstrasza was already nodding her agreement. Ysera was not far behind. Nosdormu appeared to mull over the offer for a moment and then with a hiss added his nod. Only Neltharion had not answered yet. Indeed, Malagos found his friend staring off toward the mountains as if he were listening to something. Malagos let out a low, short hiss that brought Neltharion's attention back to the gathering. With what seemed almost impatience, the charcoal-gray proto-dragon blurted, Yes! Yes! Then we shall begin now, the male announced to the proto-dragons and to the air itself. And all at once, Kalik stirred from his fog. He realized that what was about to take place, the female figure who, like her partner and Tyr, radiated a presence much more astounding than what could at the moment be visibly seen, had even used the key word. Aspects, she said, Kalik recalled. This is how Malagos and the others became the aspects. The actual event had been enshrouded in mystery even for the other dragons. Kalik suddenly remembered that when he was much younger, he had sometimes wondered how the 5 had come to be the world's defenders. And with those memories returned others, so many others. Kalik knew again who he had been and what had happened that had drawn him into these visions. Kalik, he jolted. No, Malagos jolted. Kalik shook his head. Malagos' head. For the first time, Kalik had control. Kalik, look at me. Jaina, he gasped, turning. Jaina. But it was not Jaina he faced. Rather, Alexstrasza looked intently at him. Kalik, the fire-orange proto-dragon murmured. Look at me. Near them, 2 more hooded figures materialized. Kalik found himself caught between wanting to see what was happening and wanting to finally escape to his own existence. He wanted his life more than he had in many months, whether or not he was no longer an aspect. Concentrate, Kalik. The artifact is trying to do what Tyr tasked it with, but the foulness that was Galakrond tainted it over the millennia, distorting its function, even as it still sought to serve Tyr and the aspects. Kalik tried to seize on her words, but at the same time the newcomers raised their hands. He also suddenly sensed that there was another greater presence acting through the Keepers, that presence being the true force, bringing about the proto-dragon's coming transformations. The Titans. It is happening, the blue dragon thought. The Titans are the ones overseeing the transformation, the creation of the aspects. As they raised their hands, the figures also changed. They began to grow. Their hoods and cloaks fell away, revealing 4 giants, akin in appearance to Tyr when he had fought Galakrond. The Keepers continued to swell in size, and their bodies glowed with tremendous power. Kalik, Alexstrasza called more sharply. Look at me. Only she could have drawn him from this moment. Kalik at last concentrated fully on Alexstrasza, seeing in those reptilian eyes human ones. The world began to turn on its head. Everything except the eyes into which Kalik stared now appeared as if he were looking through the water. Kalik felt his bond with Malagos fade, and with it, the grip the visions had on him. Darkness enveloped the blue dragon. Only the eyes, Jaina's eyes, brought any illumination. Kalik held her gaze because he understood that to lose that hold would mean his doom, and also because those eyes were hers. With a gasp, Kalik at last truly woke up. He felt the floor beneath him. He detected the sense of the Nexus, the traces of generations of blue dragons, and the inherent smells that he associated with so much magic. But most important, he saw not only the eyes of Jaina Proudmoore, but also her face, her human scent, so unique among her own kind and so enticing to him, lingered in his nostrils. Calic tried to speak, to say her name, but it came out as a croak. Hush, Jaina murmured, her hand gently touching his cheek. Hush, give it a second. He was too impatient, though.
Jaina, you brought me back.
Nothing will ever take you away from me. Ever. Her tone was blunt. He knew she meant what she said, and he felt the same. Reaching up a hand without scales or claws, Calic touched her cheek in turn. Then he recalled the bane of his existence. He looked to the side and saw that despite what he would have assumed, Jaina had not destroyed the artifact. It sat nearby, its glow very slight, but still there. With an angry hiss, Calic started a spell. No, Calic. Using both hands, the Archmage brought his eyes back to her own. The artifact means no harm. Remember what I said to you in the vision.
You said...
He did not go on, instead asking,
How do you know?
I was given the key, I think by a keeper. Or maybe a part of the relic with its own purpose, I'm not certain. I only know she wasn't a Taunka.
Monique?
Neither possibility concerning the Taunka surprised him. She summoned a flagon of wine from the air, then gently set the edge to his lips. While he sipped, Jaina explained further. Tyr, the artifact, made all this clear. Always planned ahead. His only mistake was not foreseeing what Galakron would become, as if anyone could have. He tried to make up for it by finding those champions who could not only defeat Galakron, but would also be willing to sacrifice themselves and their lives forever for the sake of Azeroth.
He found them. He found the 5, Calic whispered. Malagos, Alexstrasza, Ysera, Nosdormu, Neltharion. They were heroes even before they were the Aspects. Azeroth wouldn't have reached the time of the dragons without their willingness to do what they had to do.
They saved the world without all the powers they gained as the Aspects. She paused, her eyes widening. Calic, did you see it?
No, and I don't think I would have. I think the vision was almost finished. I think I might have returned to the beginning, living it over and over and over.
Calic imagined the last few moments.
The artifact, Tyr tied it to the 5. That's what he was doing when he pointed it at us, them, imprinting the 5 on it. I think it drew from each, but especially from Malagos, the first. Tyr didn't know that it would end up inside Galakron.
The key enabled me to delve into its core, the Archmage said. I saw some of what he intended it to tell you about its function. Tyr suspected or knew that someday there would come a time when the 5 would have great doubts about themselves, when they might believe they were no longer worthy of their roles as protectors. This was sounding all too familiar to Calic.
At Wormrest it came to a head. That's when they decided just that, because they no longer had the powers of the Aspects. They'd grown too accustomed to depending on those. He frowned. And that's when the artifact awoke. It sensed that what Tyr feared had happened, if not quite as he calculated, and tried to act as he wanted. The only problems were the great amount of time and Galakron's taint infiltrating its magical matrix.
Calic tried to stand. With Jaina's arm around him, he finally managed. On somewhat unsteady legs, he walked to the relic. It no longer disturbed him now that he knew what it had been meant for. Tyr wanted them to be reminded of what they once were, and how much they had accomplished even then. To Jaina's shock, Calic picked up the artifact. What are you planning to do with that? He thought of all he had lived through in the visions and what he had seen of young Malagos and the other 4. There was only one course he could take after that.
I'm going to call a convocation.
He waited quietly in the chamber, hoping that he was not waiting in vain. He had arrived at Wormrest more than 4 hours earlier, wanting to reach it before the others. Calic still sensed nothing beyond the temple's walls. The others should have been there by now. It was already well past the hour on which they had all agreed. With a grimace, Calic recalled how in truth the 3 had only said that they would fly to Wormrest after he had pestered them over and over. It would not surprise him if they had changed their minds. For the moment he remained in his humanoid form, preferring it now for a variety of reasons. One was that he could better handle the artifact as he desired. The relic currently sat in the very center of the chamber, a few feet ahead of Calic on the platform. It pulsated quietly, its functioning having been corrected by Calic and Jaina. Galakron's taint had also been expunged, at least as far as either could tell.
If they do not come, I will have to bring it to each of them.
Even that might not solve the situation. The other 3 could very well refuse to see him.
Well, Calic, Can you tell us now for what reason you insisted we return here?
He could not help jumping. Alexstrasza, her form humanoid, strode into the chamber, looking every bit as radiant as when he had seen her in the forest. There was no sign of Ysera or Nosdormu, but Kalik suddenly sensed their nearby presence.
You've been here for a while, he muttered. We needed to discuss some things first. Now we are ready to hear you, if you still wish to call this gathering.
In response, Kalik took a few steps back from his position and transformed into his draconic form. He peered down at Alexstrasza.
I do. Very well.
She started toward her usual place, changing as she moved. By the time Alexstrasza halted, she too was no longer humanoid in appearance. Barely had she finished changing when Nosdormu and Ysera also entered. Unlike Alexstrasza, they did so in their draconic shapes and not in humanoid ones. They said nothing as they positioned themselves.
Thank you for doing this, the blue dragon quietly said.
Just what are we doing? Ysera interrupted. Best tell us quickly. You said it had to do with that thing, which I know I have seen somewhere before.
Kalik immediately concentrated on the relic.
Nosdormu hissed. Just what are you?
Tyr's creation glowed brightly. The three other dragons' gazes became locked on the relic. Kalik let out a deep breath. As it had done with him, so the artifact now did with the others, only in not so haphazard a way. All relived their past, from their first meeting with one another to the epic struggle. But whereas Kalik had been caught up in the vision for days, the three others were only entranced for a minute, maybe two. In that short time, though, their reptilian countenances displayed a series of emotions, none of which unfortunately told Kalik how they were taking this sudden journey. The artifact's glow all but faded. As Kalik expected, Alexstrasza and the others stirred. Ysera hesitated. Nosdormu stared at the relic.
That thing.
Alexstrasza looked put out.
Kalikos, you should not have done this without our permission.
Would you have given it?
Of course not,
Ysera snapped. Then, sounding surprisingly softer, Alexstrasza's sister added,
But we would have been wrong.
Nosdormu turned his baleful gaze from Tyr's creation to Kalik.
Explain this, and yourself.
Kalik did, telling them what he had gone through and the things he had experienced in the vision. He told them everything except Jaina's part in it, as she had requested. And when he was done, even Nosdormu looked astounded.
I wondered for some time after why he had brought forth that thing,
the former aspect of time muttered.
What a foolish notion to think that he could change what has happened by reminding us of this incident. It was hardly just an incident, though, the red dragon pointed out to him, and your own tone betrays you, Nosdormu. You lived it again, just as my sister and I did. You remember how you felt then, how we all felt.
What does that matter?
Ysera blurted. Kalik seized control again.
What matters is what Tyr wanted you to see, what you have to see. When we gave up our powers to save Azeroth, you three, who'd wielded them for so long willingly, did a great and noble thing. Throughout the millennia as aspects, you more than once proved yourselves willing to sacrifice your lives.
He looked at each of them, daring someone to deny what he said.
But Tyr knew, and I understand, that you were granted such fantastic powers in the first place, not just because you were there, but because you had already proved yourselves worthy several times over. Proved yourself worthy as proto-dragons, nothing more.
Nosdormu grunted.
We nearly died several times over. But you did not.
No, we did,
Alexstrasza exhaled.
Not literally, but we did die. We forgot what we once were, how we originally were. We did exist before we became aspects.
She set herself before Ysera and Nosdormu.
We existed, and we fought, thinking not of ourselves, but of everything.
Kalik pulled back again. Alexstrasza understood, but did the others?
You fought well for a run,
Nosdormu remarked to Ysera.
I thought you mad at times, but admirable. I had her to keep up with,
Alexstrasza's sibling.
I had her to keep up with,
Alexstrasza's sibling replied with a nod toward the Crimson Dragon.
And you were always there to lend your strength at the right moment, Nosdormu. You know that.
We all fought very well that day, Alexstrasza agreed, even Malagos and Neltharion.
The three were silent for several seconds, then as one they turned to face the youngest of their party. Calic remained perfectly still, aware that anything could alter the moment. Alexstrasza shook her head.
You should never have done this, Calic. It was ill-advised, Nosdormu added. Risky,
Ysera concluded.
But it has reminded us of much,
Her sister went on.
Reminded us most of all of who we were and still are.
Alexstrasza again glanced at the other two.
We have far more to think about, would you not agree?
Much, the bronze dragon answered. Ysera nodded. Something that had been bothering Calic finally demanded attention.
I have to ask one thing. We all know Galakrond as father of dragons, but it did not begin that way, Alexstrasza murmured. The first dragons to come after us knew only of the great skeleton, already long lying in the dragon blight. We made certain that the truth about Galakrond would remain secret for fear that some other might decide to follow his insidious path. Because of his immense size, many could not fathom him as anything else but a true dragon. We chose to encourage the misunderstanding, Nosdormu interjected, and in his perverse way, Galakrond did cause the rise of dragons. A father in some sense, if not exactly as we led all others to believe. And we shall continue to leave it that way,
the red dragon quietly declared. Then before a startled Calic could react, Alexstrasza turned and scooped up the artifact.
I will tend to this. Its work, Tyr's work, is done. We may not be aspects anymore, but we are still ourselves. I, for one, think that perhaps there is some more I can offer the world after all. We can only wait and see.
I understand, Calic finally dared reply.
The next convocation had better be for more urgent matters,
Nosdormu commented as he spread his wings and started from the platform.
Promise that.
I promise.
You're a stubborn one,
Ysera murmured as she followed Nosdormu.
I can appreciate that.
Calic was left with Alexstrasza. She tightened her grip on the relic.
Should I ever find that Tyr lives, I will thank him for reminding us, as I do not know if I will have that chance. I thank you in his place, Calic. There's no need. Yes, there is. You still remembered life before assuming the mantle. You remembered enough to make certain that Tyr's hopes rekindle their own drive. So I thank you for that and much else.
She left the dais, but before reaching the exit, briefly turned back.
Oh, and thank her for us also.
Alexstrasza departed before Calic could regain his composure. He immediately whirled toward a distant column half in the shadows.
You heard her?
A part of the column separated from the bulk. As it did, it became Jaina Proudmoore.
I shouldn't have come with you. I'm sorry. What will she do?
He shrugged.
Nothing. Maybe find a way to thank you again. I should have known that she of all three might sense you.
He shrank down into his humanoid form. Unperturbed by what she had just witnessed, Jaina gladly fell into his arms. For several seconds they did not speak. Then Jaina said,
Did it work, Calic? Will they rejoin the world?
Azeroth needs them. Azeroth needs them. 3 simple words, but Calic thought about how much those words covered. The 3 elder dragons carried among them such knowledge, such experience, courage, and wisdom alone that to lose even those things would leave the world sorely lacking. That Calic knew could not be allowed to happen.
I think they will, he finally answered. They've always been true to themselves. They'll see the truth more than ever now. They just forgot for a while.
Without warning, she kissed him. He replied in kind. When they separated, Jaina whispered, I'm so very proud of you, Calic.
I don't know why.
There are many reasons. Most of all for not forgetting yourself either. You still have a role in this world too. Several, in fact, I'd say. They had discussed some of this while he had been preparing for the convocation. After living through the visions, Calic was now reconsidering his decision to let the other blue dragons choose their individual paths. He still had much to mull over, and might yet decide to keep matters as they were, but there were factors favoring restoring the blue dragon flight. Not only for the sake of Azeroth, but for the sake of his own kind. He had shirked his duties just as the others had done, but he would make up for that now. And there were other roles that he had yet to completely figure out, except that Jaina insisted she would be there to assist him. Their powers combined would be potent enough, but both believed that their hearts combined might in some ways help guide Azeroth yet more for the better. Kellic thought it would be interesting to find out. "We should leave," he told Jaina. She nodded, then stepped back. As she did, Kellic transformed again. He lowered one wing so that she could climb up. "Are you ready?" Kellic asked. "Yes." The blue dragon wended his way out of the temple. Night was just beginning to fall, allowing some details in the distance still to be noticed in the gloom. Kellic spread his wings and leapt into the air. He looked back to make certain that Jaina was safe, then ascended higher. On a whim, Kellic circled Wormrest once. As he did it out of the corner of his eye, the blue dragon beheld the bones of Galakrond. A brief glint made him look closer. "What is it?" Jaina called.
Nothing. Nothing.
Kellic banked, for Jaina's sake, heading toward Dalaran before he returned to the Nexus to ascertain whether there were any lingering after effects from the artifact's presence. There was no reason he could not have told Jaina what he thought he'd seen below, except that it had probably been his imagination. She might have understood, but this was one secret he decided to keep from her. In the growing shadows of the Great Ribs, Kellic thought he had seen a figure small and cloaked, but at the same time seeming as tall and as powerful as a dragon. And whether the image of Tyr had been real for that brief time, or most likely conjured by his mind, Kellic silently thanked the Keeper for Alexstrasza, Ysera, Nosdormu, and himself. Alright guys, so we did it. Let's read this quick note. It says, "The story you've just read is based in part on characters, situations, and locations from Blizzard Entertainment's computer game World of Warcraft, an online role-playing experience set in the award-winning Warcraft universe. In World of Warcraft, players create their own heroes and explore, adventure, and quest across a vast world shared with thousands of other players. This rich and expansive game also allows them to interact with and fight against or alongside many of the powerful and intriguing characters featured in this serial novella. Since launching in November 2004, World of Warcraft has become the world's most popular subscription-based, massively multiplayer online role-playing game." And I would probably say it's still probably the world's most popular MMORPG. That was a lame note, though. They give us some further reading. I'm not going to read through all of it, but let's just see what we have and where it's on deck. So Kellic is in the book Jaina Proudmoore, Tides of War. We're going to read that in the future. And Thrall, Twilight of the Aspects. So those are both we haven't. Night of the Dragon, we haven't read yet. So Kellic will be in that one. The Sunwell Trilogy also, that's the future. And Shadowwing, Volume 2, that's a trilogy. So those are all books that are coming up in the future, probably around Cataclysm time. Jaina Proudmoore's life, let's see, her book, Shattering Cataclysm Prelude. Those two in the future. Arthas Rise of the Lich King, we've already read her part for the most part. And there's a World of Warcraft comic, not the ones we've read. We're going to be reading that too. Cycle of Hatred. And Legends Volume 5, Nightmares, we haven't read that one yet. The Five Dragons, or the Four Dragons, the World War of the Ancients trilogy, we've read that one. Day of the Dragon, we've read. Night of the Dragon, we haven't. Storm Rage is still to come, so the dragons are going to be in that one. All of these are on my radar. Twilight of the Aspects is, I guess, a cool one by Christy Golden. Shadowwing series, War of the Ancients trilogy, Night of the Dragon, Day of the Dragon. Beyond the Dark Portal, we have read that. Oh, and that's true. Deathwing is in that one quite a lot, actually. And then finally, Thrall, Lord of the Clans, we read that. These are all the other ones. We read Rise of the Horde. Legends Volume 2, Fear, we have not read that. And the comic book. We're going to read all those comics in the future. Cool. Richard A. Knack. Yeah, see, you know what I was also thinking? Actually, I had this thought separately just in the past couple minutes. One of the things I love about... So, I read a couple fantasy books, sure, in my youth, but really what made me dive into fantasy lore was the Dragonlance series. I love it to death. Didn't age gracefully, but I can't say it's worse than what we're reading now. But I think it's cool that he wrote for Dragonlance. Great series. If you like the concept of dragons being so central and being the ability to shift into humanoid form, that goes back to Dragonlance. Wolfheart, I haven't read. I don't know what Shade is. That's Legends of the Dragon Realm. I don't know what that's from. I don't think that's involved with what we're going to read. And yeah, maybe someday when we finish everything, we would look at the Book of Tyrael, Diablo, and StarCraft type of universe stuff. That's the back cover. I'm not going to read it because we've just read everything, but I do like how it's a little Murloc shop thing. All right, cool. So we have finished this 5-part series. Pretty cool as far as the content. As far as the writing, I do not feel like this needed a 25-chapter book, and I do not like that they added the short story as a prologue, which really should have gone later. It's only barely related to this stuff. It would have been, I think it would have been cooler to be read later. Yeah, and this doesn't even reference the fact that they could have a fifth aspect, Thrall, if they wanted. Yeah, I don't love that. I do feel like this dragged, and I just feel like it's just, I think the author was just almost slavishly devoted to the concept of the fives. We gotta have 5 parts. Each part's gotta have 5 chapters. And there just wasn't enough content for that, so it's stretched. Even if you look at the titles of the chapters, it's just a stretch. All right, so I'm going to be off for a few days, guys. I'll see you guys in a few. Hopefully you'll be able to catch up some previous content. But I look forward to when I come back to making some more episodes and catching us up. We're getting close to being able to start doing the Let's Plays on Warcraft 3 again. But I appreciate your time. I appreciate your attention. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you learned something. I did. And I'll see everybody next time on Lore of Warcraft.